On the morning of April 26, 1986, an explosion occurred at Reactor 4 of the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant in Ukraine. This event marked the beginning of a disaster that would affect not just the Soviet Union, but the entire world. The explosion caused such a massive release of radiation that scientists said it was 400 times more than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. 155,000 square kilometers were affected, and 52,000 square kilometers of farmland became unusable for decades. The most dangerous consequence after the explosion was the nuclear fallout, and the worst-case scenario came true. This fallout didn't just affect Soviet territories, it even reached Turkey's Black Sea coast. At the time, some officials downplayed the situation. A little radioactive tea won't hurt, they said, and even joked, it might taste better. But in reality, this was one of the greatest environmental disasters in history. Behind this terrifying explosion, there was a story that no one had heard for years. The story of three heroes. Three men who risked their lives and possibly saved half of Europe. Now, let's get to their story. Chernobyl was built in the 1970s by the Soviet Union, 16 kilometers from the city of Pripyat. A whole city was built from scratch for the thousands of plant workers and their families. Schools, sports halls, swimming pools, amusement parks, and many other facilities were created. By 1986, Pripyat had a population of around 49,000. On the night of April 25th, a long-delayed test was scheduled at Reactor 4. The goal of the test was simple. If the electricity went out, could the reactor's cooling systems automatically kick in? In short, a nuclear reactor works like a power-producing factory. Uranium-235 fuel undergoes fission in the core. This reaction produces massive heat and radiation. The heat turns water into steam. The steam spins turbines, and the turbines generate electricity. Everything works in a delicate chain reaction. But that night, nothing went as planned, and the disaster began. During the test, the operators lost control. The reactor's power dropped, then suddenly spiked. Water was pumped into the cooling system, but instead of cooling, it turned into steam. Pressure skyrocketed, and then an enormous explosion occurred. The 1,000-ton reactor lid was blown into the air. The core was fully exposed, and lethal amounts of radiation were released into the atmosphere. 2 workers died instantly in the first explosion. Then a second, even stronger explosion followed. The fire spread throughout the plant. Firefighters who rushed to the scene had no idea they were stepping into one of the deadliest mistakes of their lives. They entered without proper equipment and were exposed to deadly doses of radiation. Many of them died within weeks. The government tried to hide the disaster from the world and its own people, but the radiation was too powerful to conceal. The fires were brought under control in 6 hours, but the reactor continued to melt. The molten radioactive metal flowed like lava, and this was where the real danger lay. Beneath the reactor lay a massive pool of water. This was a mix of the plant's cooling water and the water firefighters had used to extinguish the fire, and the molten core was slowly moving toward it. If the lava reached the water, it would trigger a massive steam explosion. Not only Reactor 4, but all 3 remaining reactors could have exploded. This would have meant the uninhabitability of Ukraine, Belarus, and much of Europe, the contamination of drinking water for 30 million people, and a radioactive wasteland lasting hundreds of years. So how could this be prevented? There was only one solution: drain the water. But to do that, someone had to enter the basement where the valves were located. And that basement was completely flooded with radioactive water. A death sentence. The crisis team gathered all the workers. The risks of the mission were explained, and it was made clear that if any volunteers died, the state would take care of their families. At that moment, 3 men stepped forward: Alexei Ananenko, Valeri Bespalov, and Boris Baranov. Without hesitation, they said, "We'll do it." They knew the exact location of the valves, and they knew that if they failed, millions of people would die. It was literally a suicide mission. Wearing protective diving suits, they entered the pitch-dark basement. The water reached up to their knees, filled with lethal radiation. They carried only 2 small dosimeters, but even those were beyond their measurement limits. The water smelled metallic, the heat was suffocating. Every step brought death closer. But finally, they found the valves. They unlocked them, drained the water, and the mission was complete. When they emerged, other workers greeted them as heroes. These 3 men had saved Europe from total destruction. For years, everyone thought these 3 heroes had died there. They sacrificed their lives to save the world, people said. But in reality, all 3 survived. Boris Baranov passed away in 2005 from a heart attack, but Alexei Ananenko and Valeri Bespalov are still alive. They had been exposed to radiation, and black marks known as radiation bronzing appeared on their skin. But because they completed the task quickly and the water dampened the radiation, they avoided a deadly dose. Truly, they were heroes who saved the world and lived to tell the tale. Yes, the Chernobyl disaster was a massive tragedy, but even within that disaster, it showed how courageous humans can be. Here's an ironic detail for you. The industry minister who said in 1986, "A little radioactive tea won't hurt," died in 2011 from heart failure.